Okay, y'all broke me down, so here it is, our next iceberg. I assume at this point you know what an iceberg video is, and I'm sure you know who Donkey Kong is, so... DK Rap. In 1999, Donkey Kong 64 needed an intro theme. It didn't have to be anything special, but thanks to Grant Kirkhope, George Andreas, and a plethora of Rare employees, we were blessed with the DK Rap. This was a silly song with the intention of introducing the game's cast, along with setting a new vibe for Donkey Kong, to contrast his adventures on the SNES. You could tell he was cooler now because his song said hell in the original release. It was met with mixed reception at the time, but has of course become massively loved, even being used as recently as April 2023 with the Mario movie, though we can't be too excited about this as they didn't properly credit Mr. Kirkhope. Part of what kept its legacy alive is the memes people made, many of which changed the lyrics to be even sillier. But did you know that Nintendo actually held a contest when the game first came out, asking fans to write their own lyrics? Jeffrey Weber, as pictured here, won, and was able to professionally record his rap along with touring the Redmond, Washington Nintendo studio. Luckily, as well, we have the footage of what the Nintendo executives watched to decide, yeah, that's our guy.
He ruled Donkey Kong Isle, to be destroyed. It's up to these apes for this fate to avoid.
It's on like Donkey Kong. It's on like Donkey Kong is a phrase used in pop culture to indicate that something is about to go down. In other words, things are about to get serious, which I find somewhat comical because I never really think of Donkey Kong as particularly serious. I mean, you heard the last topic, right? Regardless, this was a phrase that every time I heard it as a child, I would point at the TV and cheer because I knew Donkey Kong and they were referencing him. Despite being found in a lot of media, we were able to track the first mainstream usage of the phrase to Ice Cube in his 1992 album The Predator. I know I talked a lot of trash earlier about the phrase, but if 1992 Ice Cube told me that it was on like Donkey Kong, I would probably take his threat seriously. Banjo and Conker connection. Aside from their games being made by the same company, Banjo, Conker, and Donkey Kong have one thing that links them all together: Diddy Kong. Donkey Kong is of course Diddy Kong's uncle and his best friend. They have gone on a ton of adventures together in their games, so their connection is pretty clear. To discover the rest of these connections, however, we need to look at Diddy Kong's racing on the Nintendo 64. When Timber the Tiger's parents go on vacation and he decides to throw the biggest party rager of 1997, things go wrong when WizPig crashes the party. To solve this issue, Timber asks Diddy Kong to help, who in turn invites his close pals Banjo and Conker. This is the first time we see either character, with both going on to have their own games. The DK universe connection actually runs particularly deep with these characters, as they were invented with this purpose before being the lucky ones from Diddy Kong's romp to get their own adventures. Luckier than Timber, at least. Donkey Kong Country cartoon. Along with many other issues that France had in 1996, they realized that there was a severe lack of Donkey Kong on their televisions. This played into the creation of the Planet of Donkey Kong, or as it would be known later, Donkey Kong Country. This was a 3D animated episodic cartoon where Donkey Kong and his friends would get into silly antics, both by trying to save the Crystal Coconut from King K. Rool, and sometimes just their own incompetence. And yes, it was a musical, and we're not talking some silly Phineas and Ferb one song per episode stuff. Donkey Kong Country had 2 musical numbers for every one of its 40 episodes. Similar to the DK Rap, modern meme culture has been a huge contributor to the show's modern success. Unlike the DK Rap, however, the source material itself doesn't quite hold up as well. I can't say much though, I've seen pretty much every episode. Rareware Buyout. Rare is responsible for some of the best games that came out in the 1990s, GoldenEye 007, Banjo-Kazooie, and of course the Donkey Kong Country series. They were also responsible for less influential games in the early 2000s, like Cameo and Viva Pinata. Most Rareware enthusiasts chalk this up to one primary event. Let's start right before that though, in 1994. Nintendo sank their teeth into the company, coming into ownership of 49% by 2000. Much to Rare's shock, Nintendo stopped there and didn't purchase the rest of the company. This left an opening for American-born company Microsoft to acquire the studio for a measly $375 million. This led to not only the cancellation of a couple projects I'll mention later, but also the reworking of a few titles to now remove any of Nintendo's IPs. Rare's own characters like Banjo and Conker would see life during this period, but many fans wish to forget that fact. Luckily, Rare had its redemption in 2018 with the very critically acclaimed Sea of Thieves. Modern Donkey Kong is the grandson of arcade Donkey Kong. Donkey Kong as we know him from Donkey Kong Country, Super Smash Bros., and other Mario ventures is not the same Donkey Kong pictured here. This is Donkey Kong Sr., or as we would later know him, Cranky Kong. Cranky, along with his wife Wrinkly, God rest her soul, raised Donkey Kong Jr., who also isn't our primary primate. Donkey Kong Jr. is the father of Donkey Kong III, the main monkey we have the blessing of knowing. Donkey Kong III has many theorized simian siblings like Funky Kong and Swanky Kong, but all we do know is that Diddy is his nephew and best friend. The Donkey Kong family tree runs really deep, and honestly, I could do a whole video on it. Fellow content creator Carlito already has though, so check that video out when you're done here. Tiny Kong redesign. Tiny Kong, introduced as one of the playable characters in DK64, was famous for her ability to do the taxes for DK Island, and her ability to physically shrink in size. Evidently, she can grow too, as between her appearance in 1999's DK64 and 2007's Diddy Kong Racing DS, she had taken on an entirely different look. This isn't insane for our standards considering it has been 8 years, but also literally no one else has changed. She now clears her older sister Dixie Kong in size, which I guess is a trope Nintendo loves to do, as Luigi is another younger, yet taller sibling. We do know that Nintendo requested the change in design, though the exact reason is up in the air. One primary theory is they wanted to differentiate her from Dixie Kong just a little more. Billy Mitchell. For over 30 years, Billy Mitchell was one of the most famous and respected gamers in the entire country. What self-admittedly started as a ploy for attention turned into a quest to claim a world record, something Mitchell would attain after it came out the previous record holder lied about his scores. This is extremely coincidental, but that's neither here nor there. As he entered college, Mitchell continued to grow his gaming prowess, even being invited to go on the Electronic Circus Tour, playing in arcades all around the country. This is the time in which he got particularly close to Twin Galaxies, before it stopped having a physical location and only maintained the worldwide arcade scoreboards. After a 10-year break to run his family's restaurant, something that altered his title on Google forever, Mitchell came back to gaming in 2004 and would come back into the mainstream due to his portrayal in the 2007 King of Kong documentary. He was so out of practice and thus denied a challenge from Steve Weber, who took the title of DK Champion, for a little while, until Mitchell retook the score in mid-2007 during a mortgage broker convention. Things were calm for like 8 years or so, and Mitchell continued to push the score higher. In 2017, a Donkey Kong Arcade Forum moderator deduced that one of Mitchell's more recent world records could not have been acquired on normal software. Twin Galaxies agreed, taking away his scores and branding him a cheater. 1, 2, skip a few, and Mitchell now is famous for threatening to sue anyone and anything that challenges him, whether it be Twin Galaxies themselves, YouTubers who cover their story, or even Cartoon Network's regular show. Since the initial claim that he was cheating, we have seen further evidence of past records also being cheated, as recently as January 2023, when we saw that the mortgage broker's Donkey Kong cabinet had a modified joystick, nullifying Mitchell's score 16 years after its acquisition. Let's get back to talking about the apes though. No hopers. We as a society love competition. NFL, NBA, NHL, World Series, World Cup, the Olympics. There are so many famous competitions, and yet they all pale in comparison to Cranky Kong's video game heroes. This is the way in which Donkey Kong Country 2, specifically Cranky Kong, ranks Diddy Kong among other famous video game heroes, in terms of how many DK coins they've collected throughout the game. This is full of cute references, with Mario having 39, Yoshi having 29, and Link having 19. What is most interesting though, are those who didn't make it to the podium. Next to the trash can is a sign titled No Hopers, along with the gun held by Earthworm Jim and Sonic's famous red and white shoes. Seeing Sonic here makes sense considering Sega and Nintendo's rivalry, but Earthworm Jim has a little more rich of a history. Doug TenNapel, creator of Earthworm Jim, has gone on record publicly bashing DKC. Since then, it has come out that Doug has some choice views on many issues, primarily those including gender and sexual identity. Video game discourse is one thing, but bigotry is what really makes one a no-hoper. New Funky Mode. After the 14-year drought of traditional Donkey Kong Country games, the world was blessed with Donkey Kong Country Returns on the Nintendo Wii in 2010. Then, 4 years later, we would get Donkey Kong Country Tropical Freeze for the Wii U. And 4 years after that, on the Switch, we would get Tropical Freeze again. This was one of the many Switch re-releases that added some quality of life changes in an attempt to make us forget the Wii U existed. One of these changes was the new Easy Mode, or Funky Kong mode. Funky, through his sheer swag, can do things like hover, double jump, step on spikes, and breathe indefinitely underwater. What really won over the people's hearts, however, was his addition to the corner of the original box art. This immediately hit the status of the other box art related memes like And Knuckles, or featuring Dante from the Devil May Cry series. The nature of these memes are to add the additions to games that really don't belong to create some funny hypotheticals. Astute viewers might realize that according to this thumbnail, this video itself features a new funky mode. Diddy's Conquest Name Misconception. Considering his role as the main protagonist of Donkey Kong Country 2, it would make sense the game's subtitle would reflect it. It would even make sense that it could be simply Diddy Kong's Quest. Of course, things can never be so simple, even if it's the title many people assumed the game had. Instead, the game is titled Diddy's Kong Quest. This simultaneously uses Kong as an adjective for his quest, and is meant to sound like Diddy's Conquest. At the end of the day, I don't hear people use the subtitle near as much as just saying Donkey Kong Country 2, so I guess it's not the end of the world. Donkey Kong Racing and Diddy Kong Pilot. As I was saying earlier in the iceberg, many games took a hit when Rare was bought out by Microsoft. One of these games was the Diddy Kong Racing sequel for the Nintendo GameCube, Donkey Kong Racing. The game was far enough along that we would be blessed with a trailer in Space World 2001, even telling us it would be out in 2002. This of course didn't happen, presumably due to the aforementioned buyout, but at least we got the cool trailer. A cool trailer pales in comparison, however, to an entire build of the game, which is what we got for Diddy Kong Pilot, a planned game for the Nintendo Game Boy Advance. Diddy Kong Pilot sought out to bring the fun of Diddy Kong Racing to a handheld system and was insanely far along in development before being completely redone from the ground up. Along the way, the now rocky love triangle between Rare, Microsoft, and Nintendo made it so the game would be remade into Banjo Pilot and be published to the Game Boy Advance by THQ. 6 years later, an anonymous Rare employee named Transparent Jinjo would post gameplay footage of the 2003 build of Diddy Kong Racing before the full ROM for this build would be released on a Rare fan site, available to be played or ripped apart and researched by the general public. Wrinkly Kong died. Wrinkly Kong, grandmother of our special boy, spent her first few appearances running the Kong College, and later the Save Cave, two places where the player could save their game and or get some hints. Between the events of Donkey Kong Country 3 and DK64, she passed away, hopefully peacefully, due to her old age. In spite of her not so untimely demise, she still appears in the games, now as a ghost. In DK64, she continued to give hints, and she even appeared in some of the spin-off games. Most notably of these was DK Barrel Blast, where she is a secret character providing us with this beautiful render. Despite his deep hatred for the Kongs, King K. Rool seems to have been a student of Wrinkly's Kong College. This is evident by Wrinkly asking the character in DK Country 2 if they can ask if K. Rool has gotten caught up on his homework. Cranky Kong Twitter Takeover. While his wife was busy being dead, Cranky Kong was given the opportunity to run the Nintendo of America Twitter account to celebrate the release of Donkey Kong Tropical Freeze in February of 2014. Throughout his takeover, Cranky Kong would share trailers, answer questions, and post his own homemade memes. These memes, and most of the tweets in all honesty, weren't particularly funny, but that's kind of the charm. It's like your actual grandfather just started using Twitter, except Cranky Kong didn't post anything racist or show any support for the January 6th insurrection. The tweet that stuck out most to me was when a user asked Cranky if he was too old for any of the new features in Tropical Freeze. He responds by saying that life is good now because he gets toted around by Donkey Kong. This resonated with me as I have also always dreamed of the very same thing. Silicon Graphics. Donkey Kong Country is still constantly renowned as a gaming masterpiece, but it's honestly a technical marvel all the same. The game's iconic graphics come from taking 3D models and turning them into sprites that could be displayed on the SNES. In terms of 2023 technology, this is no big deal. Hell, there's probably some new AI that could do it for you. In 1994, however, this was an insane undertaking. 3D animation was in some of the most infantile stages, and Rare needed the help of special devices just for the ability to create their characters. This is where the company Silicon Graphics comes in. Silicon Graphics made computers and their software, allowing for some of the earliest CGI animation. These computers were real powerhouses, and it's said they overheated to the point it was teetering on 90 degrees Fahrenheit in the office. To keep the devices and their users from overheating, gigantic air conditioning units were installed at each computer. They're lucky the game took off because I cannot begin to fathom the funds they had to dish out on each computer and then its accompanying air conditioner. Actually, I can. Based on the units available at the time, it's safe to say that each workstation would have costed anywhere from $30,000 to $250,000, and all that air conditioning could have been an additional 80,000 euros at the time, based on this article written by Harry Frisch from GameGrin, which I have no reason not to believe blindly. Silicon Graphics actually had a hand in the creation of the Nintendo 64 as well, which is another amazing feat for a company that would inevitably later fall to the normalization of animation software in more average computers. Silicon Graphics would go on to file bankruptcy twice, change its name, and be delegated to the second tier of this Donkey Kong iceberg. King Kong lawsuit. In 1983, 2 years after the release of the original Donkey Kong arcade game, Nintendo found themselves in the midst of a legal battle with the film giant Universal Studios. President of Universal at the time, Sid Sheinberg, had convinced himself Donkey Kong was directly based on King Kong, and took this as an opportunity to make money off of Nintendo's release of the game on the ColecoVision in 1982. Nintendo at the time was not the big name it is today, so fighting against a company of this magnitude was unheard of. That didn't stop them though, and after Universal threatened to sue them unless royalties were paid, they told the company they had nothing to be sued over, and it would then go to court. In order to win their case, Nintendo brought out the big guns in lawyer John Kirby, who had successfully represented some of the biggest companies in America up to this point. He did his magic, and after 7 days of intense court stuff, the judge ruled that not only did Universal not have the gorilla grip on the King Kong license they thought they did, but even then, Donkey Kong was far enough removed to not give them the basis to sue. Universal went on to appeal and lose, and then appeal a second time and lose again. This led Nintendo to file a counterclaim that Universal's unethical lawsuits had caused damages to their company, a case that Nintendo would win. The real winner, however, was lawyer John Kirby. Kirby not only received a boat named Donkey Kong, but the right to name any boat he wanted Donkey Kong. Shockingly, even cooler, was the character Kirby from the hit series Kirby was actually named after the lawyer that helped Nintendo prove itself as a big name in the entertainment industry. Miyamoto misquote. Donkey Kong Country proves that players will put up with mediocre gameplay as long as the art is good, is a famous quote from creator Shigeru Miyamoto. Or is it? This quote comes from a 1995 electronics games magazine interview titled Donkey Kong Generations: The Men Behind the Monkey. In this interview, Steve Kent interviewed Miyamoto and allegedly received this response, even speaking on it further in a G4 segment, though I can't find it. This remembrance of the quote was in 2004, and the rumor that Miyamoto didn't like the original Donkey Kong Country grew over time. This quote was denied by Miyamoto himself during a 2010 interview where he clarified that not only did he work more on the game than people expected, but he never shared the sentiment that he didn't like it. While this is interesting information, it isn't as helpful as seeing the magazine itself, something that apparently no one had been able to do in modern history until Frank Cifaldi in 2019, who went through the magazine, finding that while the technical marvels of DKC were discussed, Miyamoto never used it as a catalyst to dog the gameplay. Metroid cameos. Despite their brands being so different, Donkey Kong and Metroid are intertwined in a few different ways. Retro Studios, the company responsible for the Metroid Prime series, was also the developer of the modern Donkey Kong Country games. Like many developers before them, this led Retro to put nods to past work in their new Simian endeavors. Many of these references came in the form of background elements, like Crocomyre's skull in Foggy Fumes, or Samus's gunship in Busted Bayou. Even the AI and camera from Metroid Prime was repurposed to give foundation to Donkey Kong Country Returns. My personal favorite, however, is from Abyss in Tropical Freeze. By doing a series of commands like activating a mechanism, backtracking, and having enough health, you can see a Metroid swimming in the background. This is funny on its own, but what makes it so special is that the team took a vow of silence, and due to the difficult way to see the Easter egg, it went unseen for over 4 years. Donkey Kong Coconut Crackers. Going back to the plethora of games that got cancelled with Microsoft's acquisition of Rare, we have the game with the funniest title, Donkey Kong Coconut Crackers for the Game Boy Advanced. Despite this being one of the lesser talked about lost Donkey Kong games, we know a lot about it. Intended for release in 2001, the game took a delay before having Donkey Kong removed from the game entirely to be replaced by Mr. Pants. This isn't the Mr. Pants iceberg though, so let's have a look at some of the fun development pictures. Here we have an early logo for the game's final title, and a picture depicting an earlier name for the game, Donkey Kong Puzzle Paint. The game had an absolutely delightful title screen, and I would show you pictures of the levels and gameplay, but I think I'll let the E3 2001 gameplay demo do that for me. Very little that I know about Donkey Kong makes me think he's the perfect protagonist for a puzzle game, but that's part of the fun, and I would have really loved to see more of him than this admittedly beautiful render. Jungle Beat is the first E10 rated game. Back in the early 90s, video games were in hot water for their depictions of violence and suggestive situations. This got so bad that the government had to be involved, citing Mortal Kombat and Night Trap as some of the worst of the worst. After a lot of legal jargon back and forth and a failed Sega rating board, we landed on the ESRB as the universal and unbiased board to rate all video games. These ratings were EC for early childhood, E for everyone, T for teens, M for mature, and AO for adults only. But everything changed when Jungle Beat attacked, bringing on the E10 rating. Okay, that isn't actually true. The E10 rating was brought forth in 2005 due to the fact that video games were getting more complex and the graphics a little too realistic. You know what's complex and realistic? Having a controller that forces the player to act out the actions that directly result in the death of enemies. Or just cartoon violence, I guess. Either way, Donkey Kong Jungle Beat was the first game to take advantage of the newly enacted rating, coming out in the same month of March 2005. DK64 broke a Guinness World Record. You might feel like you never run out of things to be collecting while playing Tears of the Kingdom, Mario Odyssey, or lo and behold trying to find those Riddler trophies in the Arkham games. What none of these games have, however, is a world record. Between the 201 golden bananas, 40 banana medals, 20 banana fairies, 40 blueprints, 8 boss keys, 10 battle crowns, 1 Nintendo coin, and 1 rareware coin, oh yeah, and the 3,500 colored bananas, this game earns its title as Guinness World Record holder for most collectibles in a platformer. 1 year later, Spyro 3 would come out featuring 20,000 gems, but that's neither here nor there, let's move on. Real gun placeholders. Before he had the coconut gun, Donkey Kong dealt in a more lethal variety of firearm. Throughout the development of Donkey Kong 64, the team at Rare had implemented many of the game's core elements like swinging, collecting, and the gun. At this point in the development, it was just that, a gun, a real shotgun with real shotgun blasts. The team had become desensitized towards the heat DK was packing, but Miyamoto had obvious gripes with the concept and designed the coconut gun directly after. They liked this enough to put it in the DK wrap, which is a good idea considering the addition of a Mossberg & Sons would have made the use of hell fit right in the song for children's Donkey Kong game. Skylanders. Toys to Life is a genre of video games we know all too well in the Lord's year 2023, but in 2011 it was something particularly exciting. Skylanders helped popularize the genre with its interesting characters and more interesting figures. Between 2011 and 2018, Skylanders had 6 games without spin-offs and over 150 figurines. Only one of the 150 figurines makes it so it deserves to be on this iceberg though, and that is this, turbocharged Donkey Kong. Nintendo has always been a fan of putting exclusives on their versions of cross-platform games, whether it be costumes like in Bayonetta, or full-on characters like Link in Soul Calibur 2. This Donkey Kong came alongside Hammer Slam Bowser for the Wii U version of Skylanders Supercharged. That's really most of what there is, other than the fact that Bowser and DK are seemingly friends in this game. Oh, and it's weird they gave Donkey Kong pants. Stanley was in Greenhouse before Donkey Kong 3. Donkey Kong may have spent his first bout battling it out with Mario, and his second one being saved from Mario, but his third game involved fighting with Stanley, the protagonist of the Game & Watch game Greenhouse. Stanley got plenty of practice spraying spiders and inchworms trying to eat his plants in Greenhouse, so he was the first man on call when Donkey Kong weaponized the power of bees in the third installment of his series. There really isn't too much else to Stanley's existence, but Donkey Kong's connection to Greenhouse went even further when you were able to see the greenhouse in the background in a level of Donkey Kong Country Tropical Freeze. Diddy Kong Racing CD. Diddy Kong Racing, along with having some great gameplay, had some great tunes. Luckily they sold this CD so I can listen to the soundtrack in my car. I can't wait to just... Oh. This doesn't seem right, does it? It does indeed come this way, however. This is one of 2 character-shaped CDs to commemorate some great soundtracks from the N64 days. The other CD was Yoshi, and both were famously difficult on people's CD players. Like, they could absolutely ruin the motors of some. Also, due to them lacking the same surface area as a usual disc, it could fit significantly less music. It's okay though, these Nintendo Power exclusive masterpieces were mostly just meant to sit there and look pretty, which is something I think they accomplish very well. Diddy was originally a redesign of Donkey Kong Jr. When Rare and Nintendo were conceptualizing a game where Donkey Kong goes on an adventure with his little buddy, it made sense at first to make it an adventure between Donkey Kong and Donkey Kong Jr. The only problem is that to keep up with the new hip 90s style, they had to redesign Donkey Kong. And instead of just rebooting the series, they decided to continue the chronology, to an extent at least, and make Donkey Kong the Third. This would mean Donkey Kong Jr. is his dad, and no longer makes sense as a little buddy type companion. This leads to the decision to create a new little monkey full of all the 90s spunk a gamer could want, Diddy Kong. Look, he literally has a hat. Despite this effective replacement, Donkey Kong Jr. still dominated the tennis court in Mario Tennis 6 years later, before being delegated to cameo status from there on out. He was even gonna be in Mario Kart Double Dash before being replaced by Diddy Kong again. Sad. Anime songs in the Donkey Konga trilogy. You've seen this controller before, possibly because you used to have one, or maybe because I showed it just a couple topics ago. This is the Donkey Kong Barrel Bongo controller, and it was created to go alongside the Donkey Konga series of games. This is Nintendo's take on a Taiko no Tatsujin rhythm game, just with bongos instead of normal drums, and Donkey Kong instead of whatever these guys are. Each one of the Donkey Konga games has a plethora of music, often exclusive to the region in which the game came out. Throughout the 3 games, we have seen a few anime songs, particularly in the Japanese release, including songs from the Naruto OST, Mobile Suit Gundam Seed, and even the theme Bobobo Bo Bobobo Bo. The 3rd edition of the game was exclusive to Japan, lending itself to have even more, like my personal favorite, the opening theme from Dragon Ball Z. I don't have any time for this weeb stuff though, when the North American release of Donkey Konga 2 had Losing My Religion. Mr. X. The hatred that Kremlings have for the Kongs goes even beyond this mortal plane, as is evident by the Cackle, an undead Kremling who chases Diddy and Dixie during our minecart ride through the Haunted Hall. The German walkthrough book for DKC2, however, shows a different character filling this role, Mr. X. Many fans theorize that Mr. X is simply a somewhat more living version of a Cackle. He isn't alive per se, you can see he has no legs, but you get the idea. You can tell that he was a fighter even before he died though, as he is decorated with 2 medals. Also, despite having 2 hooks for hands, he keeps a sword attached to his hip. It's understandable why they made the design change, as Mr. X looks similar to a normal Kremling, and the big ethereal skeleton makes a larger impression. The confusion of who Mr. X was got even more when he showed up in an issue of Nintendo Power 76, but all was made clear when Steve Maley confirmed Mr. X as an early design for the Cackle during a Reddit AMA, allowing us to put all of our worries to rest. Donkey Kong Planet. Just like how the Donkey Kong Country cartoon had its debut in France, this was also the location of its first programming block in 1996. Donkey Kong Planet was co-hosted by Donkey Kong and actress Melanie Zoe Angeli, and showed a plethora of French children's programming interspersed with skits done by the cast of the Donkey Kong Country cartoon. These skits and other bumpers often had brand new animation and, interestingly enough, brand new voice actors from the original show. Most of the bumpers relied on showing the interactions between Melanie and Donkey Kong, specifically how ignorant Donkey Kong was when it came to being human. Unfortunately, in the turn of the millennium, Melanie left and was replaced by Crushy, the high school football coach-looking Kremling. A lot of great things came out of this block, including a Golden 7 award for children's excellence. The best thing I think it provided for us, however, is this clip of Donkey Kong uppercutting Funky Kong. Redneck Kong. There are a lot of different Kongs out there, and plenty of videos out there to teach them to you all, so right now, I only want to focus on one, Redneck Kong. Redneck Kong, or Hillbilly Kong, was a character intended to be playable in the aforementioned lost Diddy Kong Pilot game for the Game Boy Advance. At least he was intended to be playable at some point. Even before the game got canned due to the buyout, Redneck Kong was removed from the game, presumably replaced by Candy Kong. Even the builds of the game that were leaked and we got our hands on already removed him. So what happened to Redneck Kong? Well, when asked the name of this rustic Kong, the Rare developers said not to worry about his name because he had already been killed off anyway.
Cotton's king and men are chattels. Union boys will win the battle.
DK reference in the Impossible Lair. To help fill the Rareware platform-shaped hole in our hearts, Playtonic developed the Yooka-Laylee series of games. The first game in the series was very reminiscent of Banjo-Kazooie as a 3D collectathon, but the second game was way more akin to a Donkey Kong Country game. The games being similar alone isn't a reference, the games themselves are actually full of references. Most of the references found throughout the series are to other indie projects, but one character from the DK series managed to make their way in the game. Kind of. Everyone's favorite fish from Kong Island on Guard made his way into the game in the form of an implied, off-screen encounter. And that's it. That I can find at least. I haven't actually played the game if I'm being perfectly honest, so comment down below something I may have missed, or comment if you think I should play the game either way. Scrapped Cranky Mode. Donkey Kong Country is famously a pretty difficult game, but it doesn't mean anything to Cranky, as upon beating it, he tells you it's not a big deal because he beat it with only 1 life and under 1 hour. Upon completing the game and seeing this message, YouTuber Gerard the Completionist decided to use his connections with past developers to ask some questions. Specifically, he spoke to Greg Mails, who told the world that line was the last remaining piece of a hypothetical Cranky Kong mode that would involve playing as, you guessed it, Cranky Kong. The idea is kind of the antithesis of Funky Kong mode, where he would actually just be a lot slower and feel significantly worse to play. Many years later, Cranky would show his ability as a playable character in Donkey Kong Country Tropical Freeze, where he had a particularly unique moveset with his cane. Wario was originally the villain of Donkey Kong Country 1. Greg Mails comes back one topic later to rain another huge bout of knowledge upon us, specifically telling us about Rare's original pitch for Donkey Kong Country. Instead of King K. Rool, Donkey Kong's long-running nemesis would have been Wario, and what they were fighting over would have been significantly different as well. Instead of Wario yearning for Donkey Kong's beautiful banana horde, the fight would have broken out over Wario turning Mario to stone, using a gun he acquired by traveling to the future. How did he get the gun? Apparently Mario is smart enough to have built a time machine. Wario does this so he can become the ruler of Nintendo Land, but is obviously later thwarted by Donkey Kong. This is all very out there, albeit interesting, but by far the weirdest part of all of it is Donkey Kong has the vocabulary to say, "We haven't got a moment to lose." Donkey Kong Country 3 Anti-Piracy Screen. In late 2020, we as a society were bombarded with fake anti-piracy screens for supposedly positive children's games. The intention of these videos were meant to have a creepy air to them, and some accomplished this while others didn't. I personally enjoyed this trend, as cheesy as it was, but I think it's important to give credit to real anti-piracy screens, like the one from Donkey Kong Country 3. This screen features eerie text over the game's already disheartening game over screen. The text reads, "This product will not operate when connected to a device which makes unauthorized copies. An irregularity has been detected. Please turn the power off, wait 10 seconds, and turn the power back on." One of the most commonly cited reasons for this being creepy is the bass-boosted music in the background. I don't personally find this too creepy, which is funny considering silly things that do freak me out, but I certainly would have been kept up at night if I had seen this as a child, so no disrespect whatsoever. Donkey Kong 3 Dai Gyakushu. Taking a step back from Donkey Kong Country 3, let's talk about the original Donkey Kong 3, or at least its semi-sequel released for PCs exclusively, Donkey Kong 3 Dai Gyakushu. This game, considering the limitations of its platform, removes many mechanics of the original DK3, including Stanley's ability to jump and all of the plants he was originally protecting. Now the only goals are to not get shot by the random bugs flying around and shooting Donkey Kong in the, until he flies off screen. What makes this game most entertaining is the fact the developers, Hudson Soft, send you and Donkey Kong through a bunch of interesting places, like leaving the Earth, a country road, and the aliens. As established earlier, these choices were made based on the hardware's restrictions, but Hudson Soft took things one step further by encouraging the player to use their imagination and put these set pieces together, then send this story to the developers directly. I sent my idea in too, but they sent it back because it's 2023, and Hudson Soft has been defunct since 2012. And I just stole the plot from Garfield on the Town. Uncle Kong. More like Balding Kong, am I right? I'm just playing. This is Uncle Kong, a unique Kong exclusive to the Japanese guidebook for Donkey Kong Country 2. Throughout the book, he gives hints to Diddy and Dixie, which is all just the kind of things that a good uncle would do, which makes it really weird that he isn't actually part of the family. Yup, despite having the oh-so-familiar tie and a swanky jacket, Uncle Kong is not related to our favorite apes at all. At the end of the book, he reveals he is nothing more than a banana salesman from Osaka. I love talking about these random Kongs, so I'm upset there isn't more information to share on this guy, but honestly, I think he made a big enough impact in his time. Dixie's hair is her tail. In the instruction booklets for both DKC2 and DKC3, Dixie is referred to as a monkey, just like the lovable Diddy Kong. This raises the question, however, where is her tail? Well, many fans on the internet have thrown their hat in the ring when trying to figure it out. Obviously, she can't fit it in her shirt, and there's no way she didn't have one just because it looked better design-wise. Her ponytail had to be her tail. I mean, it's obvious, right? Diddy uses his tail for all the same things that Dixie uses her tail for. This was further supported in 2019 when designer for Dixie, Steve Miles, said that her tail had moved up to her head through some wacky evolution. In reality, Rare said on their website back in 1998 that Dixie was just a chimp and thus didn't have a tail at all. Their personal ideology I adhere to was given by Lemon Slime on Reddit. Girls don't have tails, duh. Crazy Kong. Crazy Kong sounds like it would be just another member of the Kong family, but don't worry, it's slightly more interesting. Crazy Kong is actually entirely its own arcade game. In 1981, shortly after the release of the original Donkey Kong arcade game, the game studio Falcon, which doesn't even have a Wikipedia page, created their game Crazy Kong. Crazy Kong is essentially identical gameplay-wise from the arcade classic it's based on, but there are certainly more graphical liberties taken. Most notable of these are the red girders now being bright neon green, and Crazy Kong looking different than what we might remember. It would be safe to assume that Crazy Kong is some kind of obscure bootleg of Donkey Kong, but that is surprisingly not even close to the truth. Upon Donkey Kong getting really popular in Japan, Nintendo was unable to keep up with the demand for cabinets across the country. Because of this, they officially licensed the game Crazy Kong for release in Japan. They lost this though when they breached the already extraordinarily generous contract by trying to release Crazy Kong in foreign markets. Similarly, there was much less success to the unlicensed sequel game Crazy Kong Jr. Promo CD. For better or worse, I grew up past the time for making mixtapes for people, whether they be family friends or someone you fancied at school. I can still safely say, however, that I would understand the magnitude of receiving a mixtape, especially if it was made by Donkey Kong himself. This was the case in 1994 with the Donkey Kong Country Go Ape promo CD. You'd think the contents of a promotional CD given out with the purchases of a game would contain music from the game itself, but this CD features absolutely zero Donkey Kong Country tracks, and exactly 8 tracks from 90s rock icons. There are a couple really notable names on here, like Radiohead with their song Creep, and even the band Oasis, though a year before the ever-so-popular Wonderwall would be released. Most of the songs on the album, however, are not thought back on so fondly, and many fans would have preferred songs from the game's soundtrack. Funniest of all is the original album cover for the first track on the CD, playing homage to the later developed Redneck Kong.
Cotton's king and men are chattels.
Saturday Supercade. When you think of popular CBS shows today, what do you think of? SWAT? Blue Bloods? Young Sheldon? These are all nice and all, but they pale in comparison to when CBS really peaked, 1983. This is when we saw the release of the Saturday morning cartoon Saturday Supercade. This was a video game-based anthology cartoon series featuring popular arcade characters like Donkey Kong, Frogger, and Q*bert. The Donkey Kong portions of the show focused on Donkey Kong running away from the circus as Mario and Pauline chased him down, hilarity ensues, etc., etc. Donkey Kong in these cartoons was voiced by prolific comedian Soupy Sales, paving the way for all the Seth Rogans of the world. In addition to Donkey Kong, we also have separate shorts featuring Donkey Kong Jr., who is on his own journey to hunt down his recently escaped father. Like any good Saturday morning cartoon, DK Jr. had a catchphrase in Monkey Muscle, which I've started saying to myself in bracket when things get tough. We still have access to much of this show, but many segments have become lost media over the years, with 6 total episodes of DK and DK Jr. shorts being completely inaccessible. I'm a huge fan of this early to mid-80s Nintendo propaganda, so I always love to go back and look at funny shows like this. Donkey Kong Country 4 DS. After the release of Donkey Kong Country 3, it would be a long time until we saw another new game in the series, especially due to the rockiness caused by Microsoft's acquisition of Rare. Been a while since I talked about that one, huh? In 2011, however, we the people received reasonable evidence that the wait was supposed to be significantly shorter, with a full-on Donkey Kong Country 4 made by Rare, to be released on the Nintendo DS. Okay, so maybe that's giving it too much credit. In reality, the team at Rare had simply expressed an internal desire to make another DKC game after the remakes on the Game Boy Advance. This isn't too crazy considering how much they loved the series and the success it brought Rare in the mid to late 90s. We got this news from a YouTube comment from a user named Stampors, who was later found out to be confirmed as a former employee. If the name sounds somewhat familiar, that's because, as DK Vine would later confirm, this was the co-founder of Rare himself, Tim Stamper. He not only shared this DKC4 idea got shot down, but specifically that it was shot down in favor of Diddy Kong Racing DS. I got plenty of fun out of that game as a kid, so I guess I don't have the right to be too upset over this decision. Mario characters in Diddy Kong Pilot Space World build. Earlier in the iceberg, I talked about how far into development Diddy Kong Pilot was before it got canned, but now I get to the opportunity to talk about the game back when it was first being shown to the public. Along with the game having somewhat primitive motion controls, it also featured a significantly different cast of characters. The build of the game that we have gives us access to 9 characters, 5 Kongs, 4 Kremlings. 2 years prior to the game, it only contained 7 characters, 5 Kongs and 2 Kremlings. Most interestingly though, and at the point of this topic, is the oldest build that we have any access to, which had a total of 12 characters, 5 Kongs, 1 Kremling, K. Rool, and 6 characters from the Mario series. This was the first time we had seen Mario characters coming to a Donkey Kong game like this, as opposed to Donkey Kong characters visiting in Mario's domain. The idea was scrapped early on, like really early on, but at least they were able to leave the game peacefully, unlike Redneck Kong.
Cotton's king and
The Great Ape War. Alright, y'all should buckle up because this is going to be an elaborate one. A lot of different users on the internet have given their conceptualization of this topic, and I'm going to try to make them all into one cohesive story. The Great Ape War is a popular fan theory that paints a past conflict between the Kongs and Kremlins in a much more militarized light. This is said to take place between the events of Donkey Kong 3 and Donkey Kong Country 1, and happened due to the Kremling takeover of Kong Island after Mario captures Donkey Kong Sr. in the arcade games. Upon arriving home and seeing all of the Kremling mines and factories, the Kongs, Funky, Cranky, and Donkey Kong Jr. declared war. Throughout the war against some famous Kremlings, K. Rool, Crump, and even Mr. X, the Kongs pushed the Kremlings out of the Kong Island, bringing peace until their return in Donkey Kong Country 1. This victory didn't come without smaller losses, however. All of the strategizing and frontline fighting directly resulted in Cranky Kong's physical being in the DKC series. Funky Kong doesn't try to hide his time in the war, as seen by him still dealing weapons, flying planes, and wearing his military garb in the main series. He famously lost his tail during a dogfight in the biplane barrel. If you're shocked to hear that he had a tail, so am I, and if I'm being honest, I can't really find where the evidence for this came from. The biggest loss, however, was Donkey Kong Jr.'s life. He went to war to protect his family, like Donkey Kong III, along with his wife, who also passed away or went missing. Many people believe that the famous Fedora Kong is actually Donkey Kong Jr. in disguise, unable to show his true self again for fear of putting the others in danger. Oh, and also a race war caused Donkey Kongs to join the Kremlings. Stickerbush Symphony Japanese video. In April of 2012, Taya777 provided users of YouTube with what many would call the YouTube checkpoint. This video was simple, low-quality vines in the background with some scrolling clouds as Stickerbush Symphony plays in the background. There are a million rips of this song on the internet, but there were a few things that made this video special. First was the name, which was
Spiky Barrel Maze Super Donkey Kong 2,
which translates roughly to Stickerbush Symphony Donkey Kong Country 2, but it was more alluring because it was Thing Japan. What really made it alluring, however, was that this video began to be recommended to anyone and everyone, regardless of their interests, before capturing them with its haunting and beautiful song. The music's nostalgic transcendence made its viewers reflect upon themselves and share stories of struggle, triumph, and hope in the comments. After having a moment of clarity and receiving kind replies from others in the comments or community, the user would move on. Then, many months later, they may come back and, as they would put it, save their progress as the internet's checkpoint, sharing an update on all the events that transpired since their last visit. Unfortunately, this video was taken down in 2020, but it's kept alive by the memory of its commenters and the internet's checkpoint website, which keeps all of Taya777 videos alive, along with all of the beautiful unity seldom seen in a YouTube comment section. Abandon hope, all ye who enter here. Abandon hope, all ye who enter is a quote from Dante's epic poem Inferno. Within the story, this quote is an inscription on the gates of hell. What does this have to do with Donkey Kong? I can't for the life of me find it. If someone in the comments knows, please fill me in, and I can put it in the description because I truly have had no luck in my research. Usually I would just make a joke and move on, but I really don't know here. Donkey Kong 64 Liminal Space. A liminal space is defined as a location of either physical or mental transition. This could mean places like airports or hallways, all the way to classrooms and childhood bedrooms serving as transitions through adolescence. Considering their nostalgic relevance to many individuals, video games serve as a treasure trove of these types of spaces. I want to make an entire video on that concept, however, so I'm going to skip specifically to DK64 and the Funky Monkey's relationship to liminality. Aside from Donkey Kong Island's comfort as home base and the war zone of K. Rool's tower, there was a small island on the side, the Banana Fairy Island. This island is calm and seems to be untouched by the conflict of the game. It serves as a symbol of the Donkey Kong world's mentality prior to the conflict's beginning, a time when things weren't so bad. It's the same to the Kongs as viewing a childhood classroom would be for us today. The symbolism of this simpler, more innocent time is further pushed by the need for Tiny Kong, the only child of the team, to enter the shrine in the center. Of course, the island and all of its vibes were here since the game's release, but the conversation of it as a liminal space was truly pushed to the spotlight by Anarchist Sagas with their awesome video essay on the matter that I will put in the card above. Hidden Fungi Forest Banana Coin. As I established earlier, there were a lot of collectibles in DK64, like so many collectibles that we didn't find them all until 17 years after the game initially came out. The rainbow coins in Donkey Kong 64 give each Kong 5 extra coins, making them the most valuable form of currency in the game. Because of this, there's only one in every level of the game except for Fungi Forest where an extra one was found. And the World Angry Aztec, but that one didn't take 17 years to discover, so just forget about it. To find these rainbow coins, you usually have to use the shockwave attack on particularly conspicuous dirt piles. The reason the coin in question took so long to find is because the dirt pile was hidden deep in the tall grass. The window of error when it comes to aiming the shockwave is pretty small, so even if you were randomly doing it, the chances of you finding this coin were not high by any means. This is reminiscent of the recently found inaccessible Mario 64 coin and really makes you wonder what other collectibles that were missing in all of our favorite video games. Landon Dyer Easter Egg. 17 years is a long time without finding something, but let's take it one step further and talk about an Easter egg from the original Donkey Kong that wasn't found for over 26 years. When the Donkey Kong arcade game got popular, Nintendo wanted to port it to home consoles, hiring Landon Dyer to code the 1983 Atari 400 and Atari 800 ports of the game. Among all the work that he did to bring these games to life, Landon added an Easter egg into the game that is so complicated to acquire that we didn't know about it until 2008, when Landon shared his creation process. To acquire the Easter egg, the player must do as follows. Get a new high score between 33,000 and 33,900 before losing all of your lives. The last life must be lost by falling from too high of a distance, don't forget it. You then have to set the difficulty to 4 and wait for the gameplay demo to go through until Donkey Kong jumps on the screen. Here you will see the initials LMD, standing for Landon M. Dyer. And that's all you get. Personally, I love that this is such a hilariously elaborate Easter egg, and I love the idea that secrecy really makes people think it was gonna be more substantial, but he did the whole thing himself, guys, give him a break. 1983 vinyl. If I had a nickel for every time there was a promotional Donkey Kong album released that had little to no actual involvement with the game itself, I would have 2 nickels, which is not a lot, but yada yada yada. The 1983 vinyl Donkey Kong Goes Home was created by Kid Stuff Records, a children's record label famous for making educational media and franchise tie-ins. Instead of just having songs that sounded Donkey Kong-y, this album tells a story. The story begins as Donkey Kong is brought to Gamesville in the circus before escaping to go back home to the zoo. It is then up to Mario to help him, though I'm not 100% sure what they meant by that. The album has 7 songs with complete lyrics and vocals by Rena Jones, Leon Reeder, and Dana Walden. It's a really cute piece of Donkey Kong media, and I've seen it sell recently for as low as $40, so if you ever get the chance, I would recommend picking it up, if only to brag about the fact that you own it. With that completes another iceberg. I know in the beginning of the video I sounded against the idea of doing another iceberg video, but that was all in jest. I personally love these videos as they're fun to research and allow me to talk about all the different things that I love. If you want to see more iceberg videos, I'll have the playlist for you to click here, and if you want to see some non-iceberg videos, feel free to click on those too. I like to space these icebergs out, so it may be a while before you see this format again. In the meantime, be sure to like, comment below what you think the next iceberg will be, and subscribe. It's free, so you'll always get your money's worth.